if you have a need for a quarterback, and Randall Cunningham was 36 at the time, that we kind of made the decision that we're going to go quarterback. Frank Gilliam was involved in that decision, Jerry Reichow, Denny Green at the time, and myself. And so I think Stud wasn't real happy about that, I remember. But as it turned out, immediately after we made that after we made the pick of Culpepper, I got on the phone with every team that was coming up next and trying to trade next year's first or whatever we had to do to get Javon Kearse. And I remember it got down to number 16, and the Titans are on the clock. And I called my old friend Floyd Reese. And at that point, I have no inkling I'm going to end up in Tennessee. Right. And so I called Floyd, and I said, we're really interested in this pick. What can we do to make it happen? And he said, oh, no. He said, I've got my guy in mind. Sorry, Jeff. And hung up. And then sure enough, there, Javon Kearse was picked by the Tennessee Titans. And then a month later, I'm on my way to Tennessee as the new president. And, of course, the first thing I said to Floyd Reese was, thank you for not making that trade, because Javon Kearse that season had 15 sacks, 10 forced fumbles, helped lead us to the Super Bowl, and was a great player for many years until he had a bad foot injury. But a terrific player we had there, and just kind of funny how things turn out sometimes. But I always remember Stud pounding the table for Javon Kearse.
Tell me if you're amazed by this. When I moved to Minnesota to cover the Vikings in 1990, I remember the first time I covered the draft, I got out there way early. I was just gung-ho, and I just spent hour after hour sitting and waiting. And you guys, you finally, that was the year after the Herschel deal, so you didn't pick till like the third round or something. And you finally made a pick, and Jerry and Frank came down and just sat at a little card table and, just kind of talked casually. Yeah, we kind of like this guy. We think he can help out, and went back. It was like the most low-key, understated thing you could ever experience as a sports writer. And now the draft is a party that travels from city to city, and now it's in one of your former cities, Nashville, where they're playing it up like crazy. Are you shocked at how far the draft has come as an entertainment vehicle?
Yeah, I am to a certain extent, and I think it's all part of the grand scheme of the NFL office to try to make the NFL a year-round destination, more or less, and whether it's promoting the Combine, televising the Combine on the NFL Network. I never would have thought that would have happened, kidding. That anyone would even watch that.
I know.
and then, of course, pro days, and now the draft has become such an extravaganza. In those years, had started to come on ESPN, but I don't think the viewership was real strong, and the press conferences were minuscule, as you said, and now it's just this blown-up event and crazy and massive press conferences that occur before the draft, all the smoke screens from the GMs, and then during the draft, when you talk about players, and, of course, everybody's going to gush about the player they pick, and it's just kind of much ado about nothing, really, until the guy proves himself and comes in and does it, because at this point, every GM's going to say, oh, yeah, he was our guy. We had him top of the board and had him a great grade on him and blah, blah, blah.
Surprised he was still there.
Yeah, surprised he was still there. And it's just such a universal statement. So I do think it's amazing. And then the fact that it left New York and Radio City and ends up traveling around the country and becomes this show where these cities compete, Philadelphia, Chicago, now in Nashville this year, where I'm sure they're going to put on a huge party for it and make a big show. And which I'm excited about for Nashville, since I lived there for 18 years, have a lot of friends there, and I think it's great for the city, great showcase for the town, and hopefully someday we'll have one here in the Twin Cities. But it's become just crazy time, and it's just kind of hard to imagine what it has become, the NFL draft.
No question about it. I have a couple good Twitter questions here. Actually, let me ask my Twitter question. I'm going to get my question in here first. Vikings are over the salary cap, and they have a draft class to sign. Is that problematic? How do they make that work?
Well, it's not terribly problematic at this point, because I think they've got about $1.6 million of room, and I think they'll probably need about $3 million to sign their draft class. When you talk about what's available in the rookie pool, when they pick at number 18, and then they have eight draft picks overall, and 4 of those draft picks are in the 6th and 7th rounds, and they won't even count against the salary cap because they're the amount of money that they're putting forth on those tenders is so low, because at this point, all that counts is the top 51 salaries. Those players will be beyond that. So really, it's not that difficult to sign the draft class and free up a little bit of room to get it done. And I'm sure they can figure out ways to do that and restructure one contract or do something, or maybe cut a player that is not fitting in after the draft. If all of a sudden they have picked 2 offensive linemen in the first 2 rounds, well, then maybe at that point they do something with Riley Reif or something, who knows, or reduce his salary. If they say we're going to move you inside, if they end up taking one of those top tackles, a Jonah Williams, a Cody Ford, an Andre Dillard, Dalton Risner, one of those guys, and they've got Brian O'Neill from last year, then all of a sudden Riley Reif's going to move inside, and maybe his $10 million salary or whatever it is, they can talk to him about a reduction. And at this point, he wouldn't have many options. So right. I think there are a lot of ways to get it done. And also, if you reduce a player's contract, you can build it back up with incentives so that if they did knock Reif down, they could say, hey, if you make the Pro Bowl, we'll give you that much more and make it right. So I don't think that's a big issue at this point.
And Rob Brzezinski's good at this stuff. I'm
yes.
sure he'll figure it out. Let's take a couple Twitter questions and maybe talk about the Frank Clark trade. From D.W. Jones, players taken in the 6th and 7th rounds rarely contribute. Brady, obviously, one of the handful of exceptions. Yet GM seem to love stockpiling these low-value picks. Why?
Well, I think because there are really good players that come out of those rounds. And the Vikings have a guy, Stephen Weatherly, picked in the 7th round, I think in 2016, and started 6 games last year when Everson Griffin was out, had a great showing, and probably is a future starter because I think Griffin may be on his last year under his contract. And so there are really good players. I remember our Titans Super Bowl team, we had Benji Olsen was a 5th-round pick, was a starting guard, and heck, we've had players over the years that have been really good players. Cortland Finnegan in Tennessee was a Pro Bowl corner. He was a 7th-round pick.
Somebody in the league should have used a 6th-round draft pick on Adam Thielen and didn't.
That's right, exactly. And so, as we said, great players in every round, even undrafted players. And so I don't agree that there aren't really good players in the 6th round and 7th round. There are good players in those rounds who will be starting. Maybe not to the extreme that Tom Brady turned out to be, but hey, I think in every round, as I said, you're going to find some really outstanding players. And so I always liked having those 6th and 7th round players. They also come in very humble, too.
Right.
And so they want to prove themselves. And you need those players to make the team. When you're in a tough salary cap predicament, as the Vikings are, with a very mature payroll, you need those late round picks to make the team at minimum salary with a low prorated signing bonus. And so that's really critical for your cap.
From Adam Jones on Twitter, what does Jeff think about drafting a quarterback in the middle rounds? Kirk will be gone after next year.
Is that Pac-Man who sent that?
I think it's the other Adam Jones. Okay. There are only 2 in the universe, and this is not the Adam Jones. Well, he's our Adam Jones.
Okay, I got that. I think that if you find the right quarterback in the middle rounds, that's great. And hey, we've seen Russell Wilson, Joe Montana were 3rd-round picks and Hall of Famers. Russell Wilson, future Hall of Famer, now the highest-paid player in the league. And so I think it's fine if you can find that player. And Dak Prescott, 4th-round pick of the Cowboys a couple years ago, he'll be signing his big new contract soon. And I think that for the Vikings, I don't see that happening this year. I think that they have other needs that they want to address, whether it's the defensive tackle position. We know it's the offensive line is first priority. I think defensive tackle is second priority with Sheldon Richardson gone. They did sign Shamar Stephen, but I think they want more competition in there. And I think tight end is a position they're going to look strong at and try to get another receiving option. We know that Kevin Stefanski and Gary Kubiak want to play a lot of 2 tight end offense, and the secondary is always going to be on Coach Zimmer's mind and adding to the corner list, which I thought Rick Spielman's comment was kind of funny yesterday when he said if he comes home having drafted a cornerback, his wife said, "Don't come home."
Rick
the first round.
Rick can be really fun when he wants to be. I wish he talked more often.
That was a good line.
That's great stuff.
That was a good line. So I think next year is a year that they'll look more closely at picking a quarterback in probably that third, fourth, maybe even second round when Cousins is on his last year of his deal. And by that time, they'll know what they have to a greater extent in Kyle Sloter. Sean Mannion, to me, is a short-term backup guy, and I don't think he's their long-term answer. So I think by next year they're going to be looking to add probably a more legitimate guy in those earlier rounds, not first round, but maybe second, third, fourth round, perhaps.
Let's talk about 3 quick topics: Blake Cashman, the Frank Clark trade, and what you think we might see from the Vikings on Thursday night. Blake Cashman, do you have any sense for where he might end up?
I think
either team or round.
Yeah, I think we're looking at probably third, fourth round for Blake, and I think that he's had a lot of visits from different teams and a lot of interest out there. I think he'd be a nice fit for the Vikings too, who could use some depth at linebacker, and he's a great special teams guy too, and potential starter down the road as either a weak side linebacker or an inside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme. So I think he's got a lot of versatility, which makes him attractive to teams, and so I think there's a reasonable chance he could go in the third round, which would be nice. And maybe all of a sudden somebody picks him in the second round. But I think certainly by the fourth round, I would think he'll be selected, and I'm hoping for third. And in terms of what was the next question was.
Well, just where Blake Cashman might end up in terms of either team or round. Number 2, I want to talk about the Frank Clark trade.
Yes.
What you think of Seattle trading? To me, this is just a classic trait, tale of personalities. Seattle's always looking for value. They don't want to have, they obviously thought Russell Wilson was worth a huge contract, but they're willing to move on from great players, while they still have value, and Kansas City's trying to win right now.
Yeah, and I think that it's really a kind of a fascinating trade in that regard, and especially when you look at Seattle drafted Clark in the second round a few years back and groomed him, developed him. Now he's a double-digit sack guy, but looking for the $20 million club, which Kansas City gave him in his deal when he went in the trade, and so the Seahawks move on from Frank Clark, and it creates a hole for them, too, because he was an impact pass rusher. The Vikings saw that close up and personal last December on that Monday night in Seattle. And so I think from the Vikings standpoint, they're happy. They got to go back to Seattle again this year. Yeah. And they'll be happy not to face Frank Clark, even if they end up facing one of these other pass rushers, if Seattle picks a guy like Cleveland Farrell from Clemson or whoever they end up taking as a replacement, or an edge guy, Josh Allen and Brian Burns. There's some really good pass rushers in this draft coming up. Montez Sweat's another guy, but I think that from Seattle's standpoint, you get a first and second round pick out of Frank Clark. That's a pretty good return too. And as you said, Kansas City had lost Steve Ford, and now they've got an impact guy to step in there and become a pass rusher. Justin Houston has moved on to Indianapolis, and so the Chiefs obviously felt they had a hole as in the pass rushing game, and now they've got Frank Clark. So it's really kind of interesting to make a move like that, and from Seattle's standpoint, a guy that you have developed. I would personally like to keep those kind of guys in house that have come through the system, and I think it could send a little bit of a bad message to your other players that, hey, if we succeed and we become a Pro Bowl level player, are they going to pay us? Are they going to keep us? As opposed to the Vikings' philosophy of rewarding your guys, which I think is a better approach. But I think the other part of the equation is when you've got a $30 million quarterback that they've got in Russell Wilson, it makes everything tighter. And the Vikings have found that out with their $28 million quarterback in Kirk Cousins. It does make things a lot more difficult to maneuver, and they've got a $10 million plus linebacker in Bobby Wagner, and they felt obviously he's a more important guy.
Last topic, thanks again to WhiteBearLakeSuperstore.com. Check out the website. It has tons of great stuff, including usually Deerland tires and demo cars and everything else. Let's talk about what you expect to see from the Vikings on Thursday night. And listen, nobody knows because you don't know who's going to fall. You don't know what trades are going to alter the board. But just in in general terms, what do you see happening? What do you see the Vikings going for?
Well, I think that first and foremost,